Now let's talk about who is introduced to what and when. And for those of you who have the Spell to Write and Read book, I'm going to actually be talking about some of the different steps in here. And I'm going to be talking about two different students. So we have our kindergarten, first grade student. I'm assuming that this is a beginner. This is a student who is new to the learning to read process. You might have a student at that age that's already reading, decoding simple words. Okay, that's fine, but they still need to be taught how the alphabet code works. A lot of times, if you have kids at this age who are reading, they've learned some sight words. They've learned to recognize some keywords by sight, but they still need to learn how the code works. So I'm when I say kindergarten, first grade, when I say beginner, I'm talking about that age group, and I'm talking about kids that are starting the learning to read process. Okay, so what do we do with those children? Well, we're going to start by teaching the A through Z phonograms in the context of penmanship. Let me explain. In the Spell to Write and Read book, we have a page. So this is the very front of the book, and this is what we call the scope and sequence. Okay, and this lays out the way that we teach using this method and the steps that you would take when you're teaching a child from the very beginning. And so I am going to be talking about these steps. So when I say step 5 is introduce the phonograms. Step 6 is teaching in the context of penmanship. Okay, so when I talk about the steps, I am referring to the steps that are outlined in the Spell to Write and Read book, and you can find those steps listed for you right here on the scope and sequence. Now, each of these steps refers to a step that's explained elsewhere in the book. So when I talk about teaching phonograms, there's the section of the book where it talks about teaching phonograms. Okay, so when I talk about steps, you understand where that information is coming from. Okay, so when I'm teaching a beginning student, after I have done steps 1 through 4, actually, I don't need to do 4. Steps 4 and 11 I skip with a beginning student, but we'll get into that another time. But I've done steps 1, 2, and 3. Now I'm on step 5 and 6. 5 and 6 are taught together for a beginning student. 5 and 6 go together. Okay, and I'm going to start by teaching the A to Z phonograms in the context of penmanship. So be aware, I'm just talking about the alphabet. A lot of people, they see the phonogram cards and they think the child has to learn all 70 cards, and they don't. We're just talking about A to Z. So how am I going to do this? Well, I'm going to have daily lessons. The child needs to be interacting with these phonograms every day. My lessons with a young child are probably going to be about 10, maybe 15 minutes. And I will do that a couple times during the day. So I'm not going to sit down for half an hour with a 4 or 5-year-old that's just getting started and just drill him and work on him. And he's going, Mom, I don't want to go. No, I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to just short little lessons, little bursts of learning, and then lots and lots of play and physical activity and that kind of thing. So I'm going to do short little lessons 2-3 times a day. We can work on it. And what is the child doing during those lessons? Well, the child is going to be reading the cards. So here I've got an example of some phonogram cards here. Okay, so the child's going to be, this is B. So the child would be reading the cards. So we're going to practice reading the cards with the phonogram dialogue. And then the child, we can play games. I talked last week when we talked about looking at our tools. I showed you some games that we have. And there's all kinds of games that you can make up as well that are really fun for the children. Anything you do where you turn it into a game, you've got their attention. They enjoy that. So we're going to be reading the cards, whether it's flashing the cards, which of course is the fastest method, or playing some kind of a game, which has the highest interest on the child's part. And then we're going to practice writing the phonograms. And again, go back and watch the teaching penmanship video that I did. I actually posted another video where I showed you how I was working with a student, and I actually taught her how to write the A-A-ah phonogram. So you can go back and watch those videos. Now, my goal when I'm working with my kindergarten, first grade student is exposure to the phonograms and a good usage of them for both reading and writing. Now, what do I mean by good? Familiar with them. They can recognize most of them. I'm not expecting 100%. I will not stay on this stage until that child can recognize all 26 phonograms just like that. I flash the cards and they know them and boop, boop, boop. That is not what I'm looking for here. I said good. I said good, not perfect, not mastery. They will master the phonograms once we get into the words at the spelling lesson. I'm not expecting mastery before I move on. Okay. In fact, here's 2 mistakes that people make at this stage. 1, they dwell on the phonograms and they never get into spelling. That's because they're expecting the child to master all the phonograms before they move on. They think the child has to have them perfect. That is not correct. They will master them when they're in the context of the spelling words. The second reason that people hover on phonograms and never get into spelling is because the teacher is afraid. The teacher's like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can teach the spelling. I don't know how to do all the fingers. I don't know. I don't understand how this works. And so the teacher has insecurities about her ability to teach. But, drilling cards, I can do that. So they just keep doing that over and over. And you know what happens? The child gets bored. The child's like, I've got this. Or maybe there's a phonogram that the child doesn't remember and you're constantly drilling and they're just like, oh, I'm never going to get this. And so you're just drilling the inability. And so you got to get past that too. Okay, so the first mistake people make is by dwelling only on phonograms. The second mistake is they move into spelling too quickly. So I have mentioned before that we have an awesome Yahoo group where people can post questions and they can get answers pretty timely way. And we had a mom not too long ago that posted this question. She had worked on phonograms with her little girl and she was trying to move into the spelling. But one of the things that had been lacking from her lessons, she had been not quizzing. So the little girl was not hearing the phonograms and writing them from hearing. Well, that's exactly what we're doing in the spelling lesson. And so she needed to go back to the phonograms. She had tried to move a little bit too quickly into the spelling lesson, and she had to go back and work a little bit more on the phonograms so the child was more solid on them before she could start sequencing them to write words. So it's a healthy balance. Do I go too slow? Do I go too fast? So let me give you some guidelines about how quickly to move. So a kindergarten student, this is a 4 or 5-year-old, okay, kindergarten student, you're going to take about 2 months to work on phonograms because you're teaching penmanship. And that's just about how long it takes. You're going to teach about 4 or 5 phonograms a week. So maybe a phonogram a day. Okay, not a phonogram a week. I did that one time. At the end of the year, the kids did not remember the alphabet because it had taken us so stinking long to get through it. We had a lot of fun because I was coordinating lessons and, our letter of the week, and we had snacks that started with that. It was fun, but they did not learn how to read that year. They did not learn. It's 4 or 5 a week, which means maybe 1 phonogram a day. So that would be 26 days, that's 5 weeks, and then you figure every day not only are you teaching new material, but you got to go back and review what you've already done. So and let me just warn you, when you first start teaching penmanship, it feels like it's going to take forever, but it's kind of the snowball effect where they start catching on to how it works and it speeds up as you work your way through it. So kindergarten, you're going to teach about 4 or 5 a week, and it'll take you up to about 2 months to teach penmanship, the A through Z phonograms in the context of penmanship. Now, a first grader coming new to the program without, maybe they have a little bit of writing experience, maybe you're going to want to teach phonograms 4 or 5 a day. And so it's going to take you about 3 weeks to get through the penmanship. And that's moving fast. But my goal is, how do I know when I'm ready to move into spelling, is that the child is able to take dictation. So if I say, I want you to write k, ah, but the child has to be able to write those words. Now, might not be on paper, might still be up on the whiteboard. That's okay. It can be in the large motor stage. I posted a video a couple weeks ago, I think, of Britta McCall teaching her 4-year-old, and he is writing the word top up on a whiteboard. Large motor. He did the entire spelling dictation process, but he's doing it in large motor, and that is totally acceptable. You can do that. Okay, so we're talking about the beginning kindergarten first grade student. That's the who. What am I teaching? A through Z phonograms. If it's a kindergartner, I'm going to teach about 4 or 5 a week. If it's a first grader, I'll do 4 or 5 phonograms a day. This is in the context of penmanship. Then, when do I teach the rest of them? When do I teach all those multi-letter phonograms? Well, once you get into the spelling list, that's when you're going to start teaching the multi-letter phonograms. So you'll teach the multi-letter phonograms once you get into spelling. And the WISE guide will alert you when to teach what. When you teach the first spelling list, there's 5 multi-letter phonograms that you introduce along with that. So once you're into the spelling list, you just follow the WISE guide, and that will tell you how and when to teach the multi-letter phonograms. And as far as penmanship is concerned, they've already learned how to write those letters. Now what they're learning is how to sequence them for the multi-letter phonograms. So for example, here's a phonogram I have here. This is oi. And so when I teach this phonogram, what I'll do that week is for penmanship, we're going to practice writing that phonogram. And then the child learns the connections. So if you're teaching cursive, they'll learn how to do the connections. And actually, cursive is phenomenal for helping kids sequence the letters within the multi-letter phonograms correctly because of those connections. So it's just a very powerful way of teaching the multi-letter phonograms. Okay, so we've talked about the kindergarten student. Now let's talk about the advanced student. And usually when we think advanced, we're thinking maybe, junior high, high school. They're advanced too, but I'm talking about 2nd grade on up. They're advanced. If you go to the website, it talks about 3rd grade on up. But really, 2nd grade is when we're assuming that the student has some experience with the written code. They might be reading by this time. I'm assuming we're talking about a student coming in to spell, to write, and read as a 2nd grader. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. This is when I'm first teaching the phonograms. So a 2nd grader, this is an up, second all the way up to adult. This is how I would introduce phonograms. So the who is the 2nd grade on up. The what, again, I'm going to start with the A through Z phonograms. If you remember, I'm looking at my scope and sequence in the front of the Spell, Write, Read book. And as I work my way through, step 5 is to introduce the phonograms. Okay? And I'm going to start with just the A through Z. So I can do that. Now, this is with my older student who I'm going to teach A through Z in one lesson. One lesson. Remember, with a kindergartner, that took me 2 months. With a 1st grader, it took me about 3 weeks. With a 2nd grader on up, it's going to take me 1 lesson. Now, this is just introducing phonograms. I'm not talking about penmanship. I'll come back to that, but I'm just talking about introducing phonograms. So let me say again, when I was talking about kindergarten, 1st grade, step 5, introduce the phonograms. Step 6, teach the writing, the penmanship for phonograms A through Z. Okay? We do that together. So with a kindergarten 1st grader, steps 5 and 6 in the Spell, Write, Read, Scope, and Sequence go together. Now I'm talking about an advanced student. Step 5 is to teach the phonograms. So I'm going to start with the A through Z phonograms. So how do I teach the A through Z phonograms to an advanced student in 1 lesson? Now remember, I'm just talking about introducing phonograms. I'm not talking about penmanship. All right, this is how I do it, okay? What I will do is I will introduce what I call the single sound phonograms. So there's not very many of them. They are the most of the A through Z phonograms. Most of them are single sound, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through, and usually most of the time when I'm working with an older student, they have some familiarity with the sounds and of the letters. You will find if you're working with an adult, some illiterate adults do not understand the sound system of the letters of the alphabet. The author of Spell to Write and Read was a college graduate. She obviously could read, and she was teaching an advanced reading class. I think it was, she had kids that were really smart, but they had problems with their reading. And she did not know. She had actually learned, I believe, 3 languages. She could speak English and German and French, and she'd learned all of those by sight. So she did not understand. Here she is, a college graduate teaching English in high school, and she did not understand that the sounds of the language were represented by the letters. She did not know that. And so you will run into people who are not familiar with that concept. But okay, so what I'm going to do most of the time when I'm introducing this to older kids, they get the idea that these represent the sounds. So I'll go through and I'll say, do you know what this says? And most of the time, yeah, they understand this says B. Now, this is my opportunity when I'm going through the single sound consonants. It's my chance to clean it up a little bit. So I might say, do you know what this says? And the student say, that says ba, ba. Okay, ba is actually 2 sounds. It's b and This is a consonant. The consonant sound is b, b. When I say the word boat, I don't say ba-oat. I say boat. So this is representing the b sound, not the b, So what I'm saying is when I'm going through these with an older student, I will say, do you know what this says? Student says ba. I say, let's shorten that a little bit. Let's just say b, b. And so student says b. I say, great. Okay, you knew that one. So I just kind of fine-tuned it. Am I expecting the student to remember that next time? He might. He might not. That's okay. As we continue to practice, we will continue to work on that. So this one is d, d, and so on. And so we go through these. I see which ones they know. I tell them the ones they don't. I'm not expecting the child to remember everything I've said from this one little lesson. What I'm doing is I'm exposing him to this information. And then as we get into our lessons, we are going to practice every single day to the point that this becomes second nature. So right now my goal is exposure. Exposure is my goal at the beginning. So I start with the single sound consonants. And again, that's the bulk of the A through Z. Then what I do is I will work on the 2 sound consonants. So there are 3 of them. There are 3 phonograms that have 2 sounds each. And I'll say, do you know what this says? And usually they know it says k. And I'll say that. And I say, well, it has another sound too. It says k, s. So it has 2 sounds. And so I will work with the student on being able to say those 2 sounds. Again, it's k, s. It's not k. It's not sa. That's adding vowels. I don't want to do that. I want to make it nice and crisp and isolate just the sound. It's not ka-at, it's cat. So we isolate just those sounds and we get it in the correct sequence. I talked last time when I talked about phonograms, I talked about we're teaching the phonograms in the frequency of use. So C usually says k. That's one of the rules that we teach. So C usually says k. So, but remember, I also talked about the fact that I want to initially teach just by sound. So that rule that I just said, I save that for later. We'll introduce that at another time. So, k, s. So we go through the 2 sound consonants. K, s, g, j, s, z. And I'll go through those a few times. Okay, now I gave them to you. Can you say them again? Then one of the things I do is I lay those cards out on a table. And I will say, I'll put them in front of the student, and I say, now I'm going to say one of those phonograms, and I want you to point to it as fast as possible. Now, of course, you add student interest when you have M&Ms or something like a penny or something like that. Grab a penny and put it on the card as fast as you can. And so I'm going to say a sound, and I want you to point to it. What I'm doing, this is the first step of spelling where they're hearing and they're coming up in their head with what is the symbol that represents what you just said. So when I ask the student to say, read this card, they're going from visual to sound. When I put that in front of them on the table and I say, now I'm going to say a sound, or I'm going to say a phonogram and you point to it, now we're going from sound to symbol. And so it's just a quick little game. Make sure that they're recognizing the sounds and that they can identify which phonogram. So I'll say, and as a teacher, I have to be careful that I don't look at the card, because one of the things they do is they watch my eyes and then they know exactly which one I'm doing. So I have to kind of look around. I say, okay, ready, go. And then they point to that card. And I say, g-j, and they point to that card. And we just do that rapid fire. And they start hearing those sounds and associate it with the phonograms. Then what I do is I'll take those 3 cards and I'll add them back to this set. I mix them in, shuffle, and then we go through one more time. All right, let's go through these. Now, what am I doing? I'm checking short-term memory. Do they remember that this is b, not b? And then I'm mixed in now phonograms that have more than one sound. Do they remember those? It's okay if they don't. It's okay if they don't. The learning process happens in layers. And we hear something, we forget. We learn something, we forget. We learn, we forget. We learn, we start to remember. So I'm not expecting mastery. Remember, I'm not expecting mastery. I'm working on exposure. I'm introducing a concept. We're going to play with it a little bit. Mastery will come as I get into the spelling list. Okay, so now I have all of the consonants. Okay, I have single sound consonants and I have the 3 consonants that have more than one sound. Then I will introduce the vowels, and there are 6 of them. And I'll introduce, and the reason I wait for these is because there's 6 of them, including sometimes Y, okay, which of course I don't say it that way. But some of the phonograms have 3 sounds, and 2 of them have only 2 sounds. So then I'll introduce these. Say, do you know what this says? And I'll say, oh, that's A. And I go, great. That is one of the sounds it says. But it says A more often than it says A. So we learn that first. So we're going to say A, A, Ah. You say that. A, A, Ah. Great. And then I say, okay, what's the next one? Do you know what this? E. Great. You're right. That is one of its sounds. We're going to learn it by the sounds. Remember, we're focusing on sounds. I don't want to do letter names. So, but E is one of its sounds. So then E. And so I'll go through and I'll introduce the sounds of the vowels. I, O, U, U, and for that sound, I think of being hit in the gut. You know, if I got punched in the gut, I would say that sound. So it's U, and then this one is y, I. Now this is a tricky one. I'm going to say it again. Y, I. So y is actually a consonant. So I could put that card with the single sound consonants, except for the fact that it's a consonant and it's a vowel. And when it's a vowel, it's got 2 sounds, I. And so we're gonna, and there's a whole issue with why. There's a whole nother, that's for another day. So we're gonna think I. So then we go through the cards very quickly. Then I do the same thing that I did with the consonants, the 2 sound consonants. I lay those cards out on the table. We get our M&Ms or just our pointing finger, whatever it is. And I say, I'm gonna say the sounds, and you point as fast as possible, and we rapid fire, and they point, and we have a fun time. Oh, you got them all. You're getting it. And what I'm doing is I'm ear training. They're getting used to hearing A, O, U, I, E, U, They're getting used to hearing that and associating it with the symbol that represents it. Then I take those cards and I mix it in with the entire set, and now I have all 70 cards, mix it all together, all 70 cards in one set. They're all shuffled together, and I will go through one more time, and let's read the set of cards. And so, not 70, I'm sorry, 26. 26 cards, and can they say them? I can do that in one lesson. What took me 2 months to teach a kindergartner has now been done in 20 minutes with an older student. Notice it does not involve penmanship, because I'm assuming that my 2nd grader on up has the ability to do writing. So I am not involving penmanship with that. So when I go and I look at my scope and sequence, what I just talked about was step 5, right there. Step 6 is to teach penmanship. Well, if I'm working with an older student and penmanship is not an issue, then I can skip step 6. I will tell you that for a second grader, I will still work on penmanship. If the student has already learned cursive, then cursive becomes one of the parts of our language arts lesson, but it's something we're practicing on the side. It's not something that I have to stop and teach before I can get into the spelling. If I have a second grader that comes to me, does not know how to write in cursive, and if I'm tutoring and the parents want to transition to cursive, then I will take time. You have 2 ways of doing it. You can treat that second grader like you would a first grader, spend 3 weeks, work on teaching what I just did in the context of penmanship over the course of 3 weeks, get the child up and going with cursive. That's one way to do it. Or start with where the child is using manuscript, get into the spelling lesson, and handle cursive instruction as a separate subject. And then when the child is fluent in writing their cursive, you can bring the cursive into the spelling lesson. If the child is not fluent in cursive and you try to bring it in too soon, then your spelling lesson becomes a penmanship lesson. And then the brain is redirected back to a lower level of penmanship rather than focusing on the spelling lesson. So when you're working with penmanship, an older student, you have 2 different ways of doing it. You can delay introduction of spelling until you get the cursive down, or just start with where you are and treat it as a separate subject. It really depends on how legible the child's writing is. I will tell you, I was teaching in a classroom a couple years ago. All of the students, I had, I think, 9, 10 students. So 8 of the kids could write in cursive. They were fluent. They were fast. 2 of the students, they were actually little girls, they wrote very slowly in manuscript, and it slowed the entire class down. And by, I want to say by November, the parents were working. This was in a homeschool co-op, so I was seeing the kids once a week. By about November, the parents had really worked on cursive at home, and those little girls were writing beautiful cursive, and the entire class sped up because, and I was able to get so much more done in our time together because they were able to write more quickly now in beautiful penmanship in cursive. Okay, so now what do I do with those? I'm working with an older student. Remember, the who is my advanced student, second grade on up. So I have taught, let me go back to my scope and sequence. I taught the phonograms, step 5. I taught the A through Z phonograms. I either addressed cursive and taught that, or I'm going to teach it as a separate subject, so step 6. Now the next place that phonograms shows up is in step number 9. Okay, that's when I teach the consonant and the vowel page. So I'm going to deal with phonograms on that. It's a reference page, and that is a place where I'm going to organize and introduce some concepts about the phonograms that I just taught. So I'm going to learn some common and foundational rules. I'm going to learn some common rules about those phonograms. Remember, it's not just teaching the alphabet, but it's teaching the rules that govern the alphabet. I'm going to start learning the marking system that I use. And so I cover a lot of information on that consonant and vowel page. The next place that phonograms shows up for an advanced student is step 10, and that's when I start teaching the multi-letter phonograms. And again, I can do this in one lesson. I'm expecting to introduce. I am not expecting mastery. So I'm going to go through the phonograms with my student, and I'm going to basically put them in 2 stacks. I'm going to say, do you know what this is? And I'll say, oi. I say, fantastic. You know that sound. So we'll put that in a stack of they know it. Do you know what this is? They go, I don't know that one. Now, they probably know how to read words with that, but pulling that out and what is that sound, they may or may not know that. I find kids have a problem with this one. I'll say, well, that's aw. So let's put that in the, you didn't know that one. And that's okay. We're just trying to figure out what do you know? I have kids who go, oh, I don't know any of this stuff. And then we find out that their stack of what they didn't know was about this many, and then this is what they knew. And they're like, oh, I guess I knew a little bit more than I thought I did. And it's like, yeah, you did. And so sometimes they know a phonogram, Or I'd say, well, what is this? And they go, well, I think that says E. And you say, great, that's correct. In fact, that's the most common sound it says. It actually has two other sounds it says too. It says E, A. And so they'll practice that. They'll say that over and again. And we move on. Again, I'm introducing the multiliter phonograms.